Listeners, welcome. Question to think about. How does the educational system, how has it assisted you to get what you wanted to personally or professionally? And then the opposite again, the other side of that, how does the educational system operate in a way that created barriers for you personally or professionally? Join our episode today and let's talk about it.
Now, Jody, you and these questions.
Yeah, right.
And these questions. You got to break that down for me. Like, doesn't the educational system benefit everybody? Like, talk to me.
Right. And I think our listeners would agree that no, it doesn't. Because there's going to be some listeners out there going, yeah, no, not for me. Right. So I want to, in this episode, I want to take an institution. So I'm taking the educational system.
Okay.
As a whole.
Yeah.
So I'm not picking on it. So listeners who are from the educational world, oh, we love you. Don't know how you do what you do. Yes. Props to you.
Absolutely.
But we talk about our societal system. Well, our institutions are often a reflection of our greater societal system.
Oh. Okay.
So if our societal system operates and gears towards the normalized dominant, well, many of our institutions, obviously they will, unless they're consciously working on awareness and consciously trying to put in things to operate differently. So the educational system then just stands to reason that for some of us, it has encouraged us, it has been a fit, it has worked for us, and it has benefited us. Higher probability, if you hold normalized dominant identities, the more you hold of those, that statement is true for you. But if you hold identities pointing down, they're not normalized dominant, that means you've had an experience that's not normalized dominant. The societal system, and then the education, remember, it's a reflection of the societal system, may not have been geared towards you. And so let me break it down for listeners. So for myself, growing up, remember, I had that underclass triangle.
Right.
And I spoke casual English. And so school operated, I remember going to school as a child. It operated so differently from where I grew up.
Okay.
And what I had experienced. So there's a lady in front of me telling me what to do, and I have no relationship with this lady.
Gotcha.
And then she seems to be getting frustrated when I'm not sitting down. First of all,
not you.
Right. First of all, oppositional defiant, ma'am. So and then and so I didn't feel a fit. I also grew up casual English. The emphasis was on verbal communication and nonverbal communication. The emphasis for me, it wasn't on reading. And so I didn't come into school, ready to read or just reading away.
Right.
And I spoke such casual English. And remember, for those of you who the podcast that we did, we talked about casual English has 400 to 800 word vocabulary. If you are formal English, you'll have 2 to 4 times that. So if you grew up with a formal dominant English-speaking family, you're growing up with a lot of words. And the emphasis is often on words. And so middle-class households, use your words, right? Say that to emphasize it. And I remember in another podcast, I was like, when Mrs. Johnson would tell me, like, Jody, you need to use your words. I'm like, no, Mrs. Johnson, because if I use my words, I'm pretty sure you'll send me to the principal's office. So that's not an accurate statement. So I was hitting barriers when I showed up to the school system because those 2 triangles didn't fit what I was seeing at school. I was getting judged on my low vocabulary, and I tell this all the time. I was put in special ed. I don't think they could get me there fast enough. And speech, and viewers have mentioned that they're like, man, sometimes you are enunciate, and then sometimes you are like talking really casual or slang. And it's like, right, even in these podcasts, it changes as I speak. So those were then barriers for me. Also, we talked about that I was all about the right now. I didn't have this future story. So I'm going to a place that I really don't feel like I fit in, quote unquote. And then I don't have a big, huge future story where other people, so I don't even know why I'm there. Like, I'm here because I have to come here, not because, this school is going to get me something.
Right.
And I wouldn't participate in any extracurricular activities, so that wasn't a reason to go, right?
Right.
Now, so those are some of the barriers. At the same time, though,
Okay.
the
Talk to me.
educational system provided transportation.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the educational system realized at some point that, hey, if we want people to come and get taught, we are going to have to provide transportation. And so I got to school on time because a bus came and gave me that hour ride because I was out in the country.
Right.
So that was the school system recognizing a barrier and adjusting, and so that was a benefit that I got. Because the school system did that, I was able actually to get to school. Right.
Wow.
Now, here for listeners, think about this. When do institutions address barriers? And I'm going to propose to think about what I've seen in my lifetime is that the more a normalized dominant identity experiences that barrier, then the better chance the institution has of actually addressing it. Whereas if a barrier is from a non-normalized dominant identity, the institution sometimes isn't even aware that that's a barrier, and oftentimes isn't, I don't want to say as willing, but because they're not aware, they're not addressing that barrier. So at some point in our educational system, we knew that if we want young children to get there,
Right.
we've got to provide transportation. And so the school adjusted and provided that in there. Later on, we're coming to you from the state of Minnesota. In my lifetime, it was the first year they passed it. Later on, the educational system said, hey, let's allow high school students to attend college, but the district has to pay for it. So I was the first year that happened, so my junior year I spent attending college part-time, and as my senior year I was in college full-time.
Right.
So that's another benefit that the educational system, because they provided transportation, because they changed their policy and allowed me to have access to secondary education, that's huge reasons as to why I'm in front of you with a bachelor's and a master's.
Wow, Jody, I just need you to put a pause in that because you came out the gate with fire. You know what I'm saying? Like you really came out the gate with fire. And I wanna stop to say welcome to our special guest. Jaton is back on the scene with us. Jaton White, you wanna give him just a quick intro of yourself?
Oh yeah, I can be bold and brief. Jaton White, Director of Community Wellness at Northside Achievement Zone. Happy to be here again today.
Thank you. I mean, come on, let's talk about it.
So one of the reasons that I wanted Jaton to be here, number one, Jaton's full of wisdom. But number two, specifically the work that you do in Northside Achievement Zone, using the language and the framework I set up, I find that Northside Achievement Zone and places like the Harlem Children's Zone, make sure I don't say it wrong, are not only aware of the barriers, both for the normalized dominant and those who aren't normalized dominant, but they then intentionally try to address those barriers. And so I would like you to share some of that if that feels like that's a fit. Yeah. Share some of what does Northside Achievement Zone, Harlem's Children's Zone, what barriers are they addressing and how? And as listeners, I want us to think about, did we even think that was a barrier for our children? And if we did, or through this conversation, we now get awareness that it is a barrier, why is it only selective places that are addressing them in this way?
Yeah, that's good. And there are only a few organizations that have the capacity or the finance behind them that can actually address this differently than the dominant societal systems. And that's where NAS stands out. We're both an ally for parents and kids first, and educational systems, right? We exist because we want to end multi-generational poverty. And the only way we can do that is through education, right? You got to teach people how to do things differently and to do things that are healthy.
Well, and I'm going to interrupt you. And if you want to end multi-generational, I love that you work with the parents and the children.
Yeah, and their teachers.
And the teachers.
Yeah.
Because the teachers are first just teaching, but then you have to teach all these children that hold different identities and different experiences, which can be overwhelming.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
And then I love that you working with the parents, because unintentionally, sometimes parents can become a barrier in their children's.
Yeah. Lots of adults become barriers for kids being able to get a quality education, an education that's tethered to what brings them joy instead of what brings us as adults joy and safety.
Yeah.
Kids don't get choice in that often. So NAS comes in and says, well, why don't we hear from the scholars in some cases? Well, why don't we hear from the educator in some places? Well, let's talk to moms and dads, uncles, grandmas, whoever the caretakers are. We call those the heroes. Let's hear what their needs are. And then how do we become the conduit for a conversation to take place that everybody's needs can be met, right? The teachers didn't get into teaching. One, to go into debt. They didn't do that.
Come on.
Right.
And then two, they didn't go into debt, they didn't go into teaching to be ostracized, to be criticized,
Right.
and for blame to be put on them for all of society's ills.
And
Exactly.
and we do that.
Oh, yeah.
Without awareness, go back to our other podcasts, we've turned it into either or.
Yeah.
You know,
and it's
either
a
you're
both
teaching
and,
the
that's
way
right.
we want you to teach, or you're
Or you're
not.
not.
Yeah.
And it's, yeah.
Yeah. And so we're modeled after the Harlem Children's Zone.
Right.
So if the foundation is education, and that's education for all. Education for scholars first, right? Education for those parents or those adults that are supporting those scholars, and the educations for the organizations that we're partnering with, including our own, right? We have to make sure that we're always taking an in-depth look and where we need to be learning, right? So talking to our parents and our students that we're working with and the teachers and organizations we're partnering with, what can we do better? How have we hurt? Even unintentionally, right? You have to have those unguarded conversations so that you can grow as an organization, so we can continue to do things differently. One of the things that I think, and to answer your question, that we do that's I think separates us from most nonprofits doing this work is the wraparound supports that we provide to our families. We believe that for all kids, anything's accessible. And so what are the barriers that we can move out of the way so that if that baby wants to be a scientist or a teacher or a musician, what can we do to remove the barriers from them having the opportunity to at least explore that? Is that mom needs transportation? Does someone else need to pay for the opportunity? What is it? And then how do we either, as a backbone organization, provide the resource or partner them with an organization that can do just that, right? But in a healthy way as well.
So I love that, is not just naming the barrier, but then creating the solution for that barrier.
Yeah, with their context added to the table. Oftentimes we get in these board meetings and we make decisions about people and places and things that we don't spend any time in. And you have to talk to your stakeholders, and your stakeholders include not just the people you're serving, the people you're partner with, the people that are working for you. All those people have to be in alignment with the greater vision. And we have a big one: ending multi-generational poverty.
That's huge.
That's huge.
So give us the listeners, a concrete example of what that looks like. The wraparound
support.
services.
Yeah. So we offer scholar education classes, so scholars can get empowerment classes through us. They can build their skills through that, and learning to navigate emotional intelligence. And building positive relationships. Their parents get some of those same classes as well, empowerment classes, but parents get a special dose of parent education classes. They get to learn about what it's like to be a college-bound scholar, what it's like to prepare your baby for kindergarten, or the transition. That's a big one: transition from kindergarten to mainstream education. How to advocate for your baby's IEP. Are those needs getting met through that? But how do we help you make sure? How do we help parents understand when your teacher tells your baby, or tells you your baby's on grade level? What does that mean? And so we provide the opportunities for them to learn more and go deeper into their own child's education. But it's actually freeing them too, because they're learning things that they didn't think that they would ever learn before or needed to learn too about education. And in some cases, we're supporting parents to go back to school because of that learning journey.
That is huge. That piece with helping parents, and I don't like the word helping, but partnering alongside and understanding where parents are coming from, and not operating out of judgment, but operating out of, let's talk about this and process that. Yeah. Because for myself, I mean, that for me is multi-generational, because when I wanted to go to college early, I needed my parents to sign, and they didn't. They wouldn't sign. They're like, for whatever reasons. And it wasn't until the day that I was going to go, like the day I was like, that's when class started, that the piece of paper was signed on my kitchen table by my dad. But it wasn't spoken about. Had people understand. And when I tell that story, a lot of times in listeners, so what were your thoughts? Like process, when I just said that, what were your thoughts about my parents? My parents are amazing. My parents absolutely did better than the parents that they had, and absolutely gave us more, and absolutely, were amazing. But many times, sometimes normalized, dominant, or certain experiences will hear that story and be like, well, didn't your parents want better for you? Well, didn't they da-da-da? They look at it as a deficit. And it's like, no, they did, but they also understood that I might not be successful there, and I might get hurt. And also the societal system sends clear messages if you are underclass that, don't get above your raisin, don't get too big for your britches, who do you think you are? So all of that is in play, and to help parents process that. And then for myself, because I didn't have a great experience in education, intellectually, I understand the benefits of education, but to this day, I get my kids late to school because it's just school. I know every teacher listening right now just shuddered. I know. I am that parent. But I don't, there's like some innate things I don't put an emphasis on. And IEPs, that's a whole nother one, because one of my children has an IEP, and man, I think you've got to get a college degree to understand those things.
Right? I threw that acronym out. I should individualized education plan.
That often comes if you are then in what my day
seen as in the deficit.
Seen as a deficit, and then my day was special ed.
Yeah, special education.
And so when my child was showing signs, I had to have my professional friends say, "No, Jody, you want him to get one." And I'm like, no, I don't. Like, I'm not getting him tested. I don't want him to go through what I went through. I don't da-da-da. And they're like, no, there's resources there. There's so much that can happen. And then they're always telling me what I should be advocating for and assisting. So they give me a whole new spin on that. Yeah. But to understand that there's two different experiences out there, and I love that you meet parents where they're at. To have those conversations, because otherwise we get into, and I think every listener has heard this, if the parents would just read more of their kids, or if they just this, or they just that, or they just that. Well, just like I don't want someone to tell me just to lose weight, or just to da-da-da. That gets into that either or, and not that understanding, and it doesn't come from a personal high capacity. So if we're going to hold capacity, it means we got to understand, I love it, not just the parents, but the students and the teachers.
Everybody, we in our work, everybody's an educator. So from the moment the kid gets dropped off by their caretaker or their hero, everybody becomes an educator. Bus driver, bus aide, school nurse, cafeteria folks, right? And the building engineers, like, that's the icing on the cake. That is the go-to person in the building, right? Those kids interact with all those people usually before they even get to their classroom. It's not common for teachers to greet their kids. I wish it was at the door, right? And so the kids are going through a gauntlet anyway. And so you have to tap into that's a resource. And so to just focus on kids puts the blame on kids. And we've done that long enough, and that's kind of like where we're at. The issue is we have too many adults that are unaware of how they're impacting or getting in the way of scholars actually being able to achieve a healthy education. And a lot of it's steeped in historical beliefs and bias and racism, and we just won't come to the table and have honest conversations. And I honestly believe that if we wanted something to happen, Sandra Samuels, the CEO of Northside Achievement Zone, says a lot. If white males were reading at 15%,
it'd be done. We'd have the solution.
And we can't. We have to believe we can move expedient, because over since the top of COVID, because I don't believe we're post COVID. I believe we're just post stay at home. We're still in COVID. We've seen laws and things come into place, and things get activated, and miraculously quickly things roll out in a very expeditiously. It's just really. So I'm very aware, and so as I'm seeing that, seeing that as a child who has no context, it's like, am I less than?
Yeah.
Am I unimportant? Am I not part of this American culture? Yeah. How am I going to see myself in this, right? And for parents, it's making it hard to parent in this day and age, right? How do you steer your child who's seen and feels they're the deficit, they're at the bottom?
Yeah. How are you going to support that
That?
system?
Yeah.
Then yes.
Yeah. How are you gonna get them to go to school?
And so with that, what do you all feel are some tools? Because we are fighting a behemoth, right?
Yeah.
And so you all are definitely on the front lines of that.
Yeah.
So what do you suggest? Like, what are some of the tools that?
Yeah, you know me, I'm gonna keep it simple because you can go to the extreme. You can get involved in your neighborhood. Your neighbors got enough money to get you a lobbyist. You can go all the way to that extreme. You can just be simple. Show up at your kids' schools. That as parents, caretakers.
So okay, when you say show up,
Yep.
Can you share a little more
Absolutely,
about
and I
showing
do
up?
mean
Because-
show up
because, you know,
healthy. Yep.
'cause-
Yep. Let me break it all down. Don't just show up to be showing up. Show up to provide nurturing for kids who may not have it. Right. Show up with the capacity to be able to listen and just observe.
And when does this happen though? Because you know,
Yeah,
being Project Eve International,
Yeah.
right? We have access to the schools as well through our parents.
Yeah.
And so I know a lot of times we're in the office,
Yeah.
right? So at the office we've signed in, and it's okay. What's next, right? Because a lot of times you can't get past.
Oh,
you know what I'm saying?
there's some gatekeeping
there's some
happening.
gatekeeping
Yeah.
happening, you know.
So I got anybody listening, get a pen, write this down. No, I'm just kidding. You have got to make friends as a parent, caretaker, partner, however you're connecting with the school. You got to make friends with that front office staff. Those are your best friends.
Best
right?
Now I'm gonna interrupt with that. And if you represent a school system, you have to relook at where do we have parents go to? Because I will
that's
tell you
good.
right
That's
now,
good.
the office has never been a good place for me. Nothing good happens in the office. Later in my career, it got to the point I thought it was kind of lazy on their part, but the principal would call me overhead. Jody just come. I'm like, you can't come down here. You can't come down and get me.
Yeah.
I mean, at least come down and get me so I can make a scene or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But nothing. So to this day, I hold that in my body. To this day, I have a reaction when I go to an office of the school.
Yes.
I find myself.
Wow.
I start rubbing my head. I'm like
Wow.
going.
The anxiety.
I like
of,
that you
okay,
brought that up.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's not again either or, like, oh, either parents just have to make friends, or schools just got to get it together.
Well, yeah, the
Is
schools
that-
got to get it together.
But it's
Your
both,
environment has to be welcoming.
but
If parents
it's
are
both
having
and.
that visceral response, imagine what kids are going through.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
And-
So it's a both and. The front office staff, the school staff in general, needs to be warm and welcoming. You don't have to be in love with every child, but you do need to be able to appreciate every child that comes in that building.
And their parents.
And their parents. And their parents, you have to understand and hold some empathy that they have an experience that's different from yours. And you have to honor that. And so what we're proposing, and I'm probably letting the cat out of a bag too soon, but what we're proposing is bringing in all of our parents and the teachers before back to school nights.
Nice.
And have them actually do meet and greets
Nice.
with the current school year's teacher and the last school year teacher. And the reason we want to do
Beautiful.
that
I
is so that you get
beautiful.
a whole picture of your scholar with the current year teacher.
I love that.
The parent and the teacher can talk, and along with the scholar, can talk about how the scholar best learns, what brings them joy, what frustrates the teacher, how to contact mom. We have to figure out, and organizations like ours just need to do more of that, just providing the space, feed the people, provide the space and the opportunity for people to just think differently about what we're talking about. And we're critical here. We're critical here. Our education system across the nation is trashed, right? It really, kids and teachers, educators aren't seeing the value in it. You know, they keep talking about we got a teacher shortage, and I keep saying, no, we don't. We have 4.6 million teachers registered in the United States. We don't need 4.6 million teachers every year. What we have is an institution that doesn't know how to care for its people, not only its educators, nor its students.
Right.
And so it has to be organizations that go enforce the education system to do something different, and not later, right now.
That's good. That's good. Well, how do you want to wrap this one up, Jody?
I'm still thinking. That's why the face looks like this. So, yes. I want listeners to think about our societal system operates and gears towards the normalized dominant. So then how does that impact our institutions? Many of our institutions then are geared towards the normalized dominant. And we just brought up, for example, the educational system. What other institutions in your world do you access that you can go back and look at and see, oh my gosh, that is pretty normalized dominant? And then with our awareness and building capacity, how do we work together? Not in that either or. Stop pointing the fingers, but I love, how do we create a system that does nurture its learners? Because I love the Harlem Children's Zone, like their retention rate of their teachers is
unheard of.
Right. And so it is possible to nurture teachers and parents and to provide space to come together.
Absolutely.
Because those two, parents and teachers, are folks who do want better for their children.
That's right.
But let's talk about what better looks like and how do we go about that. And so our educational system is a reflection of that societal system, and to understand that it's geared to the normalized dominant. And I don't want to lose the point, because you both mentioned it, I mentioned it, that when the normalized dominant experiences the barrier, we see movement faster at a policy level. And so I want people to like, yes, if our young white men were reading at 15%, do you think that more policies would be be funded, more conversations would happen?
We know they would.
I know in my lifetime, I'll apply it to something else, is drugs. You know, the use of drugs back when we thought it was more isolated towards communities or people who had identities pointing down. You know, treatment was there, but it wasn't, But now, all of a sudden, I hear, because drugs is affecting so many and so many triangles and normalized dominant triangles, all of a sudden I'm hearing much faster and much more frequently about, we got to look at this different, we have to fund it, and we have to, but I came from back when we criminalized it. You use, you go to jail, and now all of a sudden we're talking about it different. I don't know, so looking at that piece for our listeners is what carries weight. What makes us as a societal system change and act? It's not an either or again. It's both. People gain awareness, and also when it affects normalized dominant, we often see that change. So with our educational system, how we can apply this awareness and relook at it so that we're supportive of all the scholars. I like that word.
Great episode, ladies. This was amazing. Jaton, once again, thank you for coming on to our show.
Again, a privilege.
As we close, this is us building capacity within ourselves, institutions, and our community. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you soon.